Our moderator for the session is Mr. Zafar Hilaly, former senior diplomat and retired foreign service professional. He has become well known as a political analyst and commentator on current affairs, especially concerning the international dimension of issues. Hilaly holds an LLB honours from King's College, London. He joined the civil service of Pakistan and then the foreign service between 1966-67 and has held key assignments such as Special Secretary Foreign Affairs to the Prime Minister and Additional Foreign Secretary. He has served in various positions with Pakistan missions to Sweden, Czechoslovakia, Washington, D.C. and the United Nations. Zafar Hilaly has been ambassador of Pakistan in Yemen, Nigeria and Italy. He is also a newspaper columnist in well-known daily newspapers including Express Tribune, The News, Daily Times and The Friday Times. He frequently appears in TV talk shows. Mr. Zafar Hilaly.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, today we are going to hear how France and Germany, France represented in this case by Germany, because the French gentleman apparently didn't get a visa for Pakistan. So today we are going to hear from Germany, France managed to bury the hatchet and emerged as the two superpowers of the new European Union, and how some members of civil society in Pakistan and India are challenging their respective governments to do the same under the Aman Ki Asha program. There are lessons in the French-German experience that are relevant for Pakistan and India, because at one time French and Germans felt they too were destined to be eternal enemies. I recall driving through post-war France as a young boy with my parents and being greeted by unfriendly stares till we discovered it wasn't really us, but the German origin of the car in which we were traveling, to which the French and Dutch were objecting. It's easy to say that we should live and learn by the experience of others. But the difficulty here seems to lie in living while we learn. Over the past 70 years, we subcontinentals have survived gruesome experiences, including the slaughter of tens of thousands of our people, without learning any lessons. Indeed, who can say with certainty that even the worst possible catastrophe, nuclear war, will be avoided, considering all the loose talk going on about the virtues of first strike and the mad rush with which each country is adding to its nuclear arsenal. Disastrous mental distortions have come to motivate people and movement in both countries. Nationalism, jingoism, xenophobia, a patriotism which kills, obsessive attachments to religion and dogma now plague large segments of opinion in India and Pakistan. They pollute the intellectual atmosphere. They hold us in bondage to perverse notions about life and living. The Germans and the French went through a similar experience and waged two terrible wars. But here's what matters. They eventually got it right. They managed to overcome the spores of fear and hate. So let's hear how they did it and learn. Perhaps if we take what they say to heart and act on their advice, we will one day thank them for stopping us walking off a cliff as they did on no less than 2 occasions in history. To discuss these matters, we have a distinguished panel comprising Tilo Klinner, Thomas Brussig, Ghazi Salahuddin, and Amin Hashwani. The biodatas of all of them can be found in the booklet that has been distributed. So without further ado, let me call on Tilo Klinner. You have the floor, sir, and our undivided attention.
Thank you very much, Zafar. Assalamu alaikum. A very good morning here in the Karachi Literature Festival. We are very happy to participate in the Karachi Literature Festival. We were present yesterday at the opening, and I am also very happy to discuss with you and the panel the lessons of our German-French relationship. Zafar already mentioned it. The original idea having this panel came into being after a series of lectures I held with my French counterpart, Christian, well, half a year ago, or the last year, which was the Élysée year, so it was 50 years, and the 50 years anniversary of the so-called Élysée Treaty, which is a fundamental treaty between Germany and France, which was actually at the very much at the fundament of our further development of our relations. Unfortunately, my French colleague and friend left for France, and his replacement is about to come to this country, but waiting to have some administrative problems to be solved. So whereas I wouldn't say that I have a mandate to represent the French Republic here, I am trying with my friends here to give you some insights how we tried to overcome what was called the arch enmity between France and Germany. Actually, maybe also before continuing on the toolbox, how we tried to do it, the two wars actually which were devastating Europe in the 20th century came on top of an even longer, very confused relationship between both countries with loads of atrocities. It's actually dating back by and large to the War of 30 Years, so we are in the 17th century. And after that, we had a couple of different wars before, and then it all culminated in the catastrophe, in the largest armed conflict in history, which is called World War II, and implied, besides France and Germany, nearly the whole world, had an Asian theater too. After the war, not only Germany, which lost the war, was destroyed, but also the whole of Europe was in shambles. And for the first time, a different mentality came into being. We understood that this tit for tat, the zero-sum game ideology, had led us in a terrible dead-end street. And if we were to progress and get out of this disastrous post-war scenario, we had to change attitude. And for the sake of being short, already in 1955, we had for the first time a German-French conflict about a very tiny area which was called Saar, which was solved in an amicable way. There was a referendum, and following the referendum, the Saar area, which was still occupied by the French forces, became a part of Germany following this referendum. So for the first time, a conflict which we solved amicably. And in 1963, our leadership in France and Germany decided to have a fundamental treaty for our relationship, which is called the Élysée Treaty. What is striking with the Élysée Treaty is it's very short. It's one of the shortest treaties you would find. But it has two very important elements which I would like to mention. And one is it has a top-down approach. It says that the leadership of the country has to decide to meet regularly. So we have regular meetings of the heads of states, of the ministers of foreign affairs. So it starts from the leadership. But, and that is the important element of it, at the same time, it was highlighted that we also need a bottom-up approach from the civil society. We understood that the civil society, that both things are actually complementing each other. Without a political will to overcome enmity, it is very difficult to achieve this goal. But without the civil societies, without the population of the country, you also cannot do that, because you will not get the necessary stability of the relations. And therefore, there were a couple of institutions which were actually established with this treaty. One of them is an organization for youth exchange. Tremendously successful organizations where hundreds of thousands of young people could visit the partner country. I myself have participated in one of their projects, and as I said, hundreds of thousands of young Germans and French visited the respective partner country. Second of all, we had partnership between cities. Now we have even partnership between regions. We have partnership between chambers of commerce, with professional organizations, sport clubs, whatever. So the civil society came in force, reinforcing this concept of German-French friendship. And therefore, like when still 1945, after the war, people thought that we could never be friends. Now, about 95% of our population would think it is absolutely impossible that we could be enemies again. So that is one very important aspect. A second one, because I've promised not to take more than seven minutes to start with. Naturally, this project has been embedded in a larger regional context, which is the European reunification. So it is actually not only Germany and France, but Germany and France as part of a larger Europe, which is built on the principles of democracy and participation. The European Union, as all of you know, sometimes goes through rather good phases of progress, and then sometimes is also encountering crisis moments, but by and large is the most successful integration exercise the world has ever seen. And also this is because Germany and France have been the motor of this integration from the beginning. Two things before I finish. A third aspect, which I would leave to Thomas Brussig later on. It's also not unique. We do have also between France and Germany, after having this French-German process, we have now complemented, after the fall of the wall and the end of the Cold War, having similar processes with our neighbors to the east. But I will leave this to a later part of this discussion. And the third one, what I would like to do today is that we should discuss if this process we see in Europe could be a blueprint, a model, or an inspiration for our subcontinental situation here. I rather tend to number 3, but I'm very intrigued and thrilled to hear what is the opinion in this audience. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So you have to have the political will. You have to have the civil societies on board. You've got to have youth organizations meeting and exchanging visits. You have to, it has to be embedded in a larger context. Wonderful. Would you like, Amin, to go next? And I tell you, naturally, we haven't reached anywhere near that stage. Although we do have SAARC, South Asia. We have the rudiments of such an institution. But what are the difficulties that you face? What are the promising returns that you have had? So tell us about it, and very briefly, the way forward.
How many minutes do I have? 7 minutes?
You can have, yes, 7 minutes. If you are good, you can have 10.
More, I can give some of
my No, it's fine. I think what I'll do is, instead of talking on Aman Ki Asha, which everyone really knows about, I just want to compare the LIC treaty, which the Council General spoke about. What is important is there was the Treaty of Versailles also before that, and some may argue that because of this war guilt which Germans had to go through, World War II happened because of that. So I think the people who...
Can you speak in the mic, please?
Yes. Sorry, can you guys hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think what was important is that post-World War II, there was a lot of wisdom which the leaders had learned. You know, you had the victor and the vanquished, but the victor was very generous. And they made it as a joint project to build up the entire Europe. Instead of post-World War, it was quite contrary to that. So, and peace was the only option left, because after the massive devastation. So hence, for us, I think our circumstances are very, very different. And plus, 50 years ago and now, the world has changed, and quite dramatically it has changed. So I just want to allude on some of these thoughts. First of all, I think we're living in this information age, and while it's supposed to inform us, but it has not enlightened us at all. We are all biased human beings by nature. Instead of dispelling some of our misperceptions, it has reinforced our biasnesses. You look at US, it's polarized. The fact they had a near meltdown in Washington between Congress and the Republicans shows how polarized the US society is. You look at Europe, you have the ultra-rightist movements, be it in France or some of the Scandinavian countries also, it has started. You look at Pakistan, we are facing mini civil wars on multiple fronts. You look at the Arab Spring, the whole hopes and aspiration of having democracy and etc. Again, the entire Middle East is in mini civil wars on many fronts where, you know, post-Arab Spring, there are vacuums and people are, you know, competing for like power. So we are in a very turbulent times. Since we are so much entrenched into it, somehow, you know, we just accept it and we're just going with the flow. So while there are opportunities, but there are huge challenges at the societal level and at we as individual levels as well. And while we talk about clash of civilization, I think the real clash is taking place within civilizations. Each and every of our societies is divided, more polarized, and in conflict. So hence, it is a very challenging situation. If you look at India, previously you had a centralized, strong government, be it Indira Gandhi's time. But today you look at it, it is a coalition government where the states wield a lot of power, and in a lot of cases you have the tail wagging the dog, where you cannot take decisions that are in the national interest as opposed to state interests. And so hence the regional local politics start ruling the national policies. You look at in Pakistan, again, we are in the siege state and hence in a siege mentality as well. We all human beings with multiple identities, and the ones that we feel is under siege is what we will identify ourselves with. And hence you have Islam under like threat from the West, and you have manifestations in many forms. You know, you see in TV talk shows, and the extreme is of course the TTP. So hence, whenever we feel that we are under siege, we'll never have the luxury to be generous. Post 9/11, the Americans felt that they were under like siege, and the human rights, civil society laws, everything went out of the window, and everyone said, we are Americans. So I think we Pakistani, or in the Muslim world also, a lot of places, they are going through this mindset. So in that, again, it is very difficult for societies and individuals to really rise up to it. And of course, we have the non-state actors. As the Council General said, it was more of a top-down approach. Here, now the non-state actors really play a very, very important role. And non-state actors, on the negative side, you have the militants. On the good side, you have people like Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, who are stepping up and really trying to change the whole ball game, be it polio eradication, etc. Now, and as Martin Luther King said, that in history, evil prevailed not because there were bad people around, but because the good remained silent. And I really feel that the silent majority continues to remain silent. We might be, and we are restricted to our drawing rooms only. And when we talk about this leadership failure of last 60 years, that why we've not been able to, have peace with India, both the countries, I think the leadership failure is not just political, it is the entire civil society on both sides. Because politicians are individuals, and they will always play to the gallery, being that is what their job is. And I think the civil society on both sides have not given them sufficient space for them to take the bold decisions, the right decisions for not just the country, but for the entire region. I just want to say one more thing is that India, again, Europe, France, Germany, if you look at the size of their economy, one is large by one multiple, two multiples. But in the case of India, it is the elephant in the room. It's like 10 times larger than its next biggest economy. And if you look at the regional blocks, and today, whatever we talk about integration, it will be in the form of regional blocks, because post Doha talks failure, it is the regional blocks. We have about 12 regional blocks that are progressing all over the world, and SAARC is the least of them, and primarily because you look at America, they played a very important role. You had France and Germany, of course, playing a very important role in the EU. You have South Africa playing a very important role in Africa. Here, unfortunately, in my opinion, India has not played its role to really integrate the region. It's by nature that the smaller countries around it will have a sense of insecurity, fears, etc. And the onus is always on the larger society, the larger country with the army. They have to take care of the sense of insecurities and address them in a very compassionate way, in a very way to somehow to try and integrate them. By just blaming people, pinning them against the wall, does not really work. And I think, as the Americans are also learning, that you need to use your soft power instead of your hard power to really have.
Thank you, Amin.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thomas, would you like to carry on where Tino left off?
Yeah. Hello, I'm Thomas Brussig. I'm the happy one who got a visa. Yeah, I'm a writer, and I'm surrounded by diplomats and civil rights activists. So I'm not sure if I have or I'm sure that I don't have the vocabulary to really talk on your level about this problem. But I have some ideas, and I hope I can tell you about this. First is when I heard you, and you said that that after the end of World War II, there was no alternative to an German and French friendship, and I think there was an alternative. There was a long history of that these countries were enemies, and there were a lot of reason to go on with this relation. Yeah? They could blame each other how many people were killed over the years and what have one country done to the other. But there were smart men who said, no, we have to end this. And this is important. Today we say there was no alternative to this. But I think in many situations that seem complicated and it seems reasonable to go on with the complicated and feindselig, mit der feindseligen, können Sie mir mal mit einer Vokabel helfen? Enmity, with this enmity relation. You have to, there has to be a dream or a longing for peace, and this is the first. The second is the so-called European unification or the European integration. It started as a integration of Western Europe and Southern Europe. And in the middle of the 80s, there were one single man, again, Mikhail Gorbachev, who talked about House Europe. And after the Soviet Empire collapsed, some of the bricks were used for the House Europe and some not. Europe is is bigger than we know. When we talk about the European integration, we forgot that even 2,000 kilometers east of Moscow, it's still Europe. And Russia or the Ukraine or White Russia doesn't take part in the European integration. So the European integration today is an integration of Western Europe and Central Europe, but not of Eastern Europe. And I feel a little bit sorry that that Europe missed the chance to an European integration after 1989. Maybe it will come, but it took longer, and in that moment we didn't have the men who were smart and who took the chance for an European integration. We have the bottom-up integration of Europe that we have, but not the top-down integration, only of Western Europe and Central Europe. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you.
Mr. Salahuddin, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I am almost an intruder in this place because Shahrukh Hasan had to come and speak on behalf mostly of Aman Ki Asha, and he had to go to Dubai. And he said that I could sort of sit in for him, and that's what I'm doing. As Amin Hashwani said, that Aman Ki Asha is well known, and I think I need not go into details because I have the history of Aman Ki Asha and the many functions that have been held and many projects that were undertaken. But it was just to remind you that it was launched on January 1, 2010, the same year that we had the first KLF in Karachi. And since then, the main contribution of Aman Ki Asha is that it is a coalition of the two largest media groups in India and Pakistan. Jang Jio is the largest group in Pakistan, and Times of India group is the largest in India. And these two groups came together to promote peace, to take the message to the people, and there is a measure of how they have succeeded in some areas. And that measure are the two opinion surveys that were done in India and Pakistan after an interval of 2 years. And the second survey showed that as a result of the campaigns launched by these two groups, people's opinions had changed, and they were less confused about this, less militant, less aggressive against the other country, and that is something that we should be aware of. Mr. Brussig said that he was hesitating to say something because he was sitting among diplomats and civil society activists. But let me tell him that the India-Pakistan situation is something that only poets and writers can understand, not the diplomats, not the political leaders. And that is so because it is essentially a human crisis of immeasurable dimensions. We refer to, you mentioned that after the Second World War, there is one opinion, and I am of that opinion, that Europe had nowhere else to go but to come together. The main Western Europe was so destroyed, so totally devastated that the only change that could come was peace and friendship. And it came certainly because France and Germany had two great leaders. But how it changed Europe and what is the result of that is something that we must learn in South Asia. And we have been mentioning European integration in all our discussions, and it comes up repeatedly. And both France and Germany have been great supporters of our Aman Ki Asha. We have had exclusive sessions in inviting the ambassador, two ambassadors, to tell the audience about how they surmounted the problems. But perhaps South Asia is jinxed. All these countries under the shadow of the Himalayas do not seem to be able to sort it out. And this is, I think, partly because, unlike in Europe, we have been hiding from history. We do not try and understand what happened. Otherwise, the kind of bloodshed that the partition was attended by, it's one of the most bloody episodes in modern history, considering the area in which this took place. And it was not war. It was just creation of a country and migration and communal rights. And we were not able to understand that. We were not able to look into that objectively. Compared to that, in Europe, and I recall my first visit to Germany, it was in 1987, when the Berlin Wall is still there. And in West Berlin, in Reichstag, there was a permanent exhibition which was called Lessons of History. And I still have a book on that. And the whole, it was very well curated. And there were scenes from the Nazi Germany and what happened during the Second World War, and previous to that, the First World War. The whole history was there. And I know there's something that Mr. Klinner would better highlight, that how they came to terms with it, how they looked at their history, asked questions, tried to understand what had happened. We have not done that. So that is what we need to do. Another thing that I'm totally convinced that there is no logic in the kind of conflict that has continued between India and Pakistan. Regional conflicts have always been there. Regional conflicts between neighboring countries throughout, in all regions there have been conflicts. But all progress has been economic progress, social progress, because there have been regional alliances. And perhaps it has been said that not countries but regions make progress. And it is the entire South Asia that is lagging behind. If you look around other parts of Asia, of course things are different. But I'm convinced that what we call the paradigm shift will come. Hopefully one morning we will get up and see something that's different, a new realization. And at that time, as happens when a paradigm shift takes place, everybody will wonder, how foolish were we to have continued this conflict, this animosity, this enmity for all these years, and at what cost? Because the cost of this conflict is being paid by people who need education, who need hospitals, who need social development, and both these poor countries. They are, I mean, some of the poorest people in the world live in South Asia, which is so proud of its ancient civilizations, and we just had Mohenjo-daro celebration in Mohenjo-daro to underline the fact that this region goes so far back in history, and it is where great world revolutions were born in the Indus Valley. But look at how emphasis on defense and emphasis on creating a national security country has deprived people of their fundamental rights. And a realization has to come sooner or later that this is a folly, that it was madness, that we have to make a new beginning. And I think that beginning will come, whether it comes in my lifetime or not, I don't know.
Thank you very much. Is there any end to the foolishness? I mean, we've plunged just about every depth possible, but is it ever going to end? Well, let's see what the audience thinks. Please, suggestions, questions, everything. Mr. Najmuddin Sheikh.
Bhai, mic kahan hai?
You are blessed with a very powerful voice, so you don't need a mic, I think.
Thank you. I thought that was a very interesting presentation. I thought that perhaps I'd put to the panel the fact that there are striking parallels, but there are also things that are missing. To the Pakistani audience, the best thing that you said was a referendum in 1955 to determine the fate of a region which was occupied by one country and which in the referendum chose to go to the other country. Of course, for Pakistan, that is the issue. So if this particular parallel of the European integration movement were to occur here, there would be nobody happier than the Pakistanis. But I think there are other elements that need to be considered. I think there was certainly a European impulse, but that European impulse was backed by perhaps the threat of communism and the unity of NATO. I'm not sure, but I have a feeling that that provided part of the spur for this. And lastly, I think, well, not lastly, but another element, I think before 1955, you also had the European coal and steel community. And I think that economic integration, that movement towards economic integration served as an example. I still think that there is a parallel, despite the enormous disparity in the economies of India and Pakistan. And that is not the sort of disparity that exists between Germany and France. But it is, there is a sufficient disparity to suggest that that need not necessarily be an obstacle to greater integration. Now, a point that we need to think of. Now, do we need the spur of an external threat to bring unity in South Asia? There were moments in history when that was talked about, and that moment went by and was never repeated. But I asked our European colleagues, both Germans, but the Europeans, as to whether this was really a factor in the European Union. And lastly, I think here we have to focus on what the Ambassador Hilaly spoke of the fact in his initial remarks, political will. And that political will, how to bring that into existence. Second, how can, do we have to emulate the top down and the bottom up? I think that was a very, very good point, that it came from both the Elysee Treaty and the frequent meetings, and also from civil society, the youth exchanges and everything else. Ghazi Sahib just explained that Aman Ki Asha has been able to get civil society more galvanized, but how to get the top-down arrangement in place in the face of things like Mr. Amir Ashwani's reference to the non-state actor and their particular contribution to the political climate that prevails, and whether that political climate can be overcome by strong, resolute leadership. I have a hope that that can happen. Whether we get that resolute leadership at this stage or we get it a little later, I think we've had far fewer years of hostility so far than they recorded between Germany and France. But I hope we can overcome it more quickly. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Sen. We'll come back to the comments on this. Any more questions? Yes, please.
Very two small important questions. One, I was struck by the honesty of Mr. Thomas Brussig, who said that there is down upwards integration, but not from top to bottom. That was a very important comment, and I would like to know the answer to that. And one small question to my German friend. How does Europe look at America? I mean, like a big brother or as a bully or what? Thank you.
How does Europe look on America, as a big brother or as a big master?
And the important question is for you also.
Okay.
Top
one more.
bottom.
Let's just take one more and then we will try the answers. Yes, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I would like to ask, when you mentioned regarding the history, and like since the theme is literature, so I want to know, okay, while you speak of history, writing, what kind of history? The Pakistan studies history? The history by the Indo-Pak foreign writers on Indo-Pak? Or the local writers who have a bias towards religion or not towards? And the question would be, I think, since you're a writer, so was there such a change in the writing ways in the history, illustration of history while the unison was happening, or whether everything was kept clean, neat, and like the rivalry was shown very clearly, or was it hidden? There were patterns of hiding a few things.
Okay, thank you. Now, Tina, would you like to have a go at the first question? I mean, the political will in society. I'd like to actually not refer you to the German-French thing, but I would like to ask you about India and Pakistan. Do you, as a diplomat based here for the last 2 years, immersed in all aspects of Pakistan's relations with other countries, do you feel genuinely that there is a desire, there is a political, and if there is a people's desire, is it backed up by a political will on the part of the government and the establishment that the people's desires should be given precedence, I mean, should be given importance? Do you think we've reached that stage in Pakistan?
So, yes. Probably a little, not so strong because we get an interference if you can tone it down a little bit. Are Pakistan and India ready for it? Naturally, I'm much better positioned to talk about my impressions of my last 2 years working here in Pakistan. And by and large, I see a development that the political decision makers of this country are understanding the need for having a peace process, and more than a peace process, close cooperation with India. There are many practical economic questions. The present government in Islamabad has made this point very often and put it on the top of the agenda. And we also understand that what you call the establishment has changed their outlook on the situation. Naturally, these things, and maybe that's also an answer when talking about this 1955 referendum. Zafar gave me 7 minutes, and therefore I went through the European history since 1945 in 7 minutes, which is a fast-forward mode. And so it is naturally, there are many elements in this toolbox which can be used also in the relationship between India and Pakistan. But naturally, I think the political will comes with two elements. One is the understanding of the necessity of coming together. That helps. I would like to comment on this one. Yes, 1945, it was not in the sense necessary that it was the only political way to go, this European integration and the French-German cooperation, but it was by far the most attractive one. It was the most attractive one from a viewpoint of our populations, having spent so much energy, so much blood, and also so much capital and influence after this World War. One has to understand, 45, Europe as a whole was out of business. And the superpowers, the two superpowers, maybe I can come back then to the American question, were the United States of America and the Soviet Union. Both countries which are, one is a non-European power, the other one, rightly said, is part of Europe as a geographical notion, but was also not a European power in the sense that it wanted to integrate in the European process. It was by far different. It was a communist regime with all its special, with a special typology of a so-called people's democracy. So how do you bring the political will about? By trying hard. One of the problems is that very often nations are out of sync. That is something you're experiencing right now. I think by and large now Pakistan wants or intends to accelerate the process, whereas our Indian friends over the border are embroiled into a pre-election campaign where it is quite difficult for them to give the impression to be overly inclined to concessions of whatever kind it may be. So therefore, it is very important to actually continue the process and don't get astray by the spoilers which are in the business also. Like, if you look at this, sometimes a move forward in the Pakistan-Indian relationship is accompanied by some incidents at the line of control. And one has to ask the question, why does this happen? And it happens because there are still people who think they have vested interest in this process, not realizing. So therefore, the support of the civil society and we have talked about that even the political level, the politicians are also dependent on the support of the population.
Thank you, Tino. One thing, I'd like you to address yourself to is the question, so far we are our own worst enemies. Do you think it would have helped if we'd had a common enemy? And now don't go into this common enemy being poverty and this and that, A common enemy united there's nothing like danger to focus the mind, right? And the danger of the Soviet thing somehow focused the minds of the Europeans to come together. Do you think we need a common enemy?
In life, I follow the philosophy that it's not only the deed that we do, but also the reasons why we do them is perhaps more important. Uniting because of some third common enemy coming is a very stupid way of this is my personal opinion. This thing, we should do it because of our commonalities, because of the greater good, not on a negative context. So I would always go for that, it is a wrong way of going about doing it. As far as things like, credibility gap, etc. between India and Pakistan is concerned, if you look at the credibility gap within our own society, the fact that, Indians talk about that the Pakistan army is against peace between India and Pakistan, and I've always argued against that notion, the fact that Pervez Musharraf, being Chief of Army Staff, moved away from the UN resolution unanimously, which no other political party could do, shows that the army wasn't really against peace with India. But, forget about the Indians talking about it. We in our own societies talk about this thing that, oh, the army is against India, etc. And I've always said, no, that is not the point. So I'm saying it is important that we need to get our house in order and engage with the other side. Similarly, there are a lot of issues within India also. They need to get this their own house in order, and this whole jingoistic shining India and incredible India, where they have 600 million people who are below the poverty line. So this all gloss and everything needs to, there has to be a reality check on both sides, and we really have to look at things like poverty, education, as our common enemies and unite on that, not on these conspiracy theories or these paranoias that, America is against Islam. It's utter rubbish. And the sooner we get a reality check, the better we will be on course to really improving ourselves.
Ah, the famous reality check, yes. We keep checking out and we keep checking out and we never get to it. Thomas, would you like to say anything on what has been said so far?
I would like to say anything. In the beginning, I said that I have problems with the vocabulary, but it is an advantage, I think, because when you say conflicts because of your accent, it sounds to me like cornflakes. So. So maybe the solution is to consider the conflicts as cornflakes, yeah? So I'm an artist, I have to say something like this.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
But I was asked for the...
But this was a pause in his...
Oh, I see. I thought to eat the cornflakes. Ah.
Yes.
Go ahead, Thomas.
Yeah, there were questions to me about the... bottom down and bottom up approach. When I'm in Berlin, I hear a lot of Russians talking. There are Russian shops that opens, and there are marriages between Germans and Russians. So on this level, there is a kind of integration and a European integration, but on the political stage there is not such an integration. We are all happy that there is no enemy, that there is no fear of danger and nuclear, that there is no danger of a nuclear war or of a war at all. So we are happy about this, but it's not really integration.
Thank you.
Why? You have to ask those who are in charge on the top. But they can, by the time in Russia, there is an Russian nationalism now again, so it's easy for them to say we do our own thing and we don't need them and we have our own history. I think this is the Russian situation on the top. And in Europe, I don't know why they missed the chance in the early 90s to start a real European integration with Eastern Europe.
Yes, may I?
Yes, please.
Initially, let me respond to the question about the textbooks, how history is taught in our textbooks. And that is an issue that our social activists have been raising for a long time, that there is a lot of hate material in the textbooks of the two countries. And there have been many examples, not just in the history textbooks, but also in the context of religion, and religious hatred is also promoted through textbooks. How France and Germany resolved that issue is very interesting. I remember in Karachi, we are having an anniversary of the peace treaty, and Mr. Klinner was also there, and the French Consul General was there, and somebody asked this question, that how did you resolve this issue? And he has the book with him now, and the French Consul General had brought the book that their history textbooks are the same text and the same photographs, the same tables, everything. It is the same. Now, it does not take place all of a sudden. It took time. The French Consul General also was telling us about how initially when Germans would visit his country, they would be looked at with suspicion, first year, second year, third year, their anniversaries. It took some years for them to become real friends. Now, in Pakistan's case, yes, there are problems, but there are more similarities between Pakistan and India at certain level. Just as Mr. Amin Ashwani said that there are conflicts within Pakistan, and we do not understand many parts. I think if you look at Punjab, the Indian Punjab and the Pakistani Punjab, it was the place where the most blood was shed at the time of partition, the most. But they have the same language, they have the same history, they have lived together through centuries. And now, when a Sikh comes to Lahore, you should see how he's greeted. Culture at some level is stronger than religion, and that has to be manifested. That will come into effect eventually. We have more in common with UP than with either Balochistan. I mean, when I say we, people living in Karachi. Sindhis are also divided. There are Sindhis in India, and they contribute to promotion of Sindhi culture and language. So there are more divisions in India than there are between India and Pakistan, the North India and South India. So these differences do not really matter. What we have learned from history is that only a plural society in which many ethnic groups, people from different religions, people having different political views, they can live together. If you have a constitution and if you have rule of law. So that's possible.
Thank you. It was a good point. Before I take your question, I want Tino to tell us a little bit more about this common version of history, which they have found so elemental in getting the two countries together. Tino.
Well, just a little bit careful, this thing is attacking me. Yes, Khazi has started and given the key word, and I think because it is tremendously important, I brought this book with me today. And maybe to start from a little philosophical point, when the human body is reproduced, that is done by the DNA, but the DNA of societies is called education. That is how we reproduce a society. And there is a very decisive choice. If you reproduce the same enmity, the same cliché of another country, of your neighbors, then the result will be the reproduction of the conflict, necessarily, because that's what in the minds of the people. And that is why, as one of these many projects between Germany and France, we had this history book. I brought it with me. Actually, there are 4 volumes. I didn't want to carry all of them, but they now started, after they started from 45 till today, now they have covered all the history from the old Egyptians till today. Naturally, as closer you come to today's world, as more difficult the task becomes. But we actually achieved a common understanding of history, which is, I think, very, very important. This book is used for teaching history in Germany, in France. It's available in French and German. And it was a tremendous work, because even between Germany and France now being friends, there are different perspectives on history, and working together was a very, very important exercise. And if you contrast it to what we see now on the subcontinent, you have a subject in the schools which is called Pakistan Studies. And I have happened to see some of these books. And if you just juxtapose it to the Indian respective works, sometimes you have difficulties to recognize that it is the same fact in history, because it is so bipolar, so completely different from each other, that you cannot relate it. And that actually reproduces conflicts, and it is an impediment. So that is something I think Pakistan and India should work on. I know it is difficult. Just anecdotally, and another 30 seconds, we had from the 30th to of October 2013 and 1st of November 2013 a very large business delegation to Germany. And we had a folder. On this folder was a map which, in our best intentions, we wanted to show how Pakistan is ideally positioned to be a hub of economic relations. But that meant also to actually give some picture of India somehow. And then we had just a map which had Jammu and Kashmir in light green. It was a complete catastrophe because the embassy told us we cannot subscribe to the whole exercise if this is not in a different color. Then we tried for 2 weeks to get a map. And I can tell you the result was we published the folder without a map because I didn't find a map which could actually reproduce the geographical, political situations without having a major problem with India or Pakistan. Right. So no map. And that is a little bit difficult. You can symbolize with some dots or whatever the moot points, but to be unable to give a geographical agreed photograph it's a little bit hard. So that was speechlessness. That has also to be overcome.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I'll have to pass over your questions because we are already late. Let me sum up. Let me use my position to benefit myself, if I may. I think there's a perverse view, which you have alluded to, which I think is encouraged by communal elements in both Pakistan and India. And they have made capital out of the indelible impression the carnage of 1947 has left in the minds of the people. But we must recognize that this is a myth. This is a myth, and yes, people have lent it support by the litany of hate that they are spreading for their own reasons. But I think the policy of peace and the feeling among some Pakistanis, especially Pakistanis of my generation, that somehow, what we've gone through, the policy of peace and amity is kind of contrived, is, it's just words and it won't ever happen. Look at what's happened in the past is wrong. It's wrong for 3 reasons. It ignores the sanction that your religion places against religious prosecution. This must be remembered. Islam imposes, it has a sanction against people who are intolerant of other religions. Secondly, it discards the elemental opposition of the founder of your nation to religious bigotry. And third, it slurs over his vision of friendly relations between the 2 countries, and I quote, "I do envisage an alliance, pact or treaty between Pakistan and Hindustan in the mutual interest of both." This is what Jinnah said. Jinnah was not the only leader who saw the need for friendship between the 2 nascent states. Look at Nehru on 21st September 1947. Any conception of conflict between India and Pakistan is repugnant, not only on moral grounds, but because any such conflict will result in disaster for both. So you have Nehru, you have Jinnah. What we have to examine is how this goodwill was dissipated in the years following independence, and how the scepter of war loomed over the impoverished masses, and eventually war itself. Well, that history we know. Less well known is that we must forget, we must forget, a la Mandela, the bitterness we have perhaps rightfully reason to recall. But we must forego that recollection. That is, and which is so often the cause of our differences. And how the Germans and the French, I mean, how did the French, occupied by Germany, Nazi soldiers running all over their country, killing at will, the resistance that then built up, and the mass executions that took place. I mean, towards the end of the war, the French got their own back, so to speak, on the Germans, the occupation forces. Yet, look at it, they forgot it. And so many years later, they have a common history. And it is inconceivable for them, genuinely inconceivable, that they can ever be anything but good friends again. So, thank you for coming here and telling us that the bitterness between nations that are so often the cause of war can in fact be overcome. And we will hopefully take away the lessons that you have told us. And for those of us like Mr. Salahuddin and Mr. Hashwani, when they go across and meet their Indian neighbors, they will put it into practice in their thoughts and in their words. Thank you very much, and thank you for coming.